me that bottle.
I didn't even have to tell you. I could have just done it, and you would have never found out.
Right. But you're too honest for that.
Yeah, Willis, that's a serious flaw in your character.
From KKK hate mail to a catchphrase invented by accident, Diff'rent Strokes was far stranger behind the scenes than anything that aired on TV. The beloved sitcom that launched Gary Coleman to superstardom hid dark secrets, bizarre production choices, and shocking salary battles that would make your jaw drop. Discover how one actress was discovered on the Gong Show, why the lead actor was once believed to be a little person, and the truth about a failed sitcom's desperate crossover attempts. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Diff'rent Strokes. Fact 1. Gary Coleman was mistaken for a little person.
Yeah, how was your day?
Just beautiful, just beautiful.
Can I ask you a question?
Ask away, honey.
Who are you?
When Gary Coleman first started appearing in television commercials and auditions around 1976 and 1977, something unusual kept happening. Industry professionals, casting directors, and even seasoned producers couldn't quite figure out what they were seeing. Here was this incredibly polished, articulate performer who delivered lines with perfect timing and carried himself with remarkable professionalism. But he stood only about 3 feet tall. The conclusion many of them jumped to was that Coleman must be a little person, someone born with dwarfism who happened to be an exceptionally talented adult actor. This misconception was so widespread that it became part of Hollywood gossip and industry chatter. People were genuinely confused because Coleman's level of skill and confidence didn't match what they expected from a child actor. He had none of the typical awkwardness or nervousness that young kids usually displayed on set. Instead, he delivered his performances with the precision and self-assurance of someone who had been in the business for decades. His comedic timing was impeccable, his ability to hit emotional beats was sophisticated, and he could take direction like a seasoned professional. The truth, of course, was that Gary Coleman was just 10 years old when he landed the role of Arnold Jackson on Diff'rent Strokes in 1978. His small stature was the result of a serious kidney condition called nephritis that he'd been battling since birth. The medications and treatments he required to manage this condition, including multiple dialysis sessions and kidney transplants, had severely stunted his growth. But his mind and talent were anything but small. Coleman had been working in commercials since he was young, which gave him an unusual level of experience and polish for someone his age. NBC President Fred Silverman was among those who initially thought Coleman might be a little person when he first saw the young actor's work. Once Silverman learned the truth, he became even more determined to build a show around Coleman's extraordinary abilities, which ultimately led to the creation of Diff'rent Strokes and made Coleman one of the biggest child stars of the late 70s and early 80s. Fact 2. The show's original title was geographically inaccurate.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. I just want you to know that I'm not upset anymore about you being insensitive and ignoring my feelings.
Before Diff'rent Strokes became the name that millions of viewers would recognize, the show had a completely different working title that didn't quite make sense when you actually looked at a map of New York City. The producers originally wanted to call the series 45 Minutes from Harlem, which was meant to emphasize the distance between the wealthy white world of the main character and the predominantly black neighborhood where the 2 adopted boys originally came from. The idea was to highlight the cultural and economic divide that would drive much of the show's comedy and social commentary, using geography as a metaphor for the gap between these 2 very different worlds. The only problem with this title was that it was completely wrong from a practical standpoint. Harlem is actually located in northern Manhattan, and the show's main character, Philip Drummond, lived in a fancy penthouse on Park Avenue in the Upper East Side, which is also in Manhattan. In reality, the distance between Harlem and the Upper East Side is only about 10 to 15 minutes by subway or taxi, not 45 minutes as the original title suggested. Anyone who actually lived in New York City or knew the layout of Manhattan would have immediately recognized that the title made no sense geographically. The producers eventually realized this issue and decided to scrap the title before the show ever made it to air. Instead, they chose Diff'rent Strokes, which was inspired by the famous phrase, "Different strokes for different folks," that had been popularized by boxing legend Muhammad Ali back in 1966. The phrase was also used in a 1968 song by musician Syl Johnson, which helped cement it in popular culture. This new title worked much better because it captured the show's theme about different people from different backgrounds coming together, without making any embarrassing geographical errors that New Yorkers would have immediately called out. Fact 3. Dana Plato was discovered on the Gong Show.
That is some snack. Sardines, graham crackers, and ice cream.
Oh, well, I just had a sudden craving.
Dana Plato's path to becoming Kimberly Drummond on Diff'rent Strokes happened in one of the most unexpected ways possible, thanks to a brief appearance on one of television's most notorious talent shows. The Gong Show, which aired throughout the 1970s, was famous for letting amateur performers audition in front of celebrity judges who could literally gong them off stage if they didn't like what they saw. And it was during one of these chaotic auditions that Plato's entire career changed direction. She wasn't there as a solo performer trying to showcase her acting skills or singing voice, but rather as part of a cheerleading squad that was hoping to make it onto the show and entertain audiences with their routines and synchronized moves. While the cheerleading team was going through their audition, producer Al Burton happened to be watching, and something about the young Dana Plato immediately caught his attention. Burton, who was working on developing Diff'rent Strokes at the time, saw a spark in her that he felt would be perfect for the role of Kimberly Drummond, the teenage daughter of the wealthy Philip Drummond, who would become the older sister to the two adopted brothers at the center of the show. What makes this discovery even more unusual is that Plato never actually appeared on the Gong Show itself, meaning that Burton spotted her during the audition process before the cheerleading squad even had a chance to perform for the cameras or find out if the judges would gong them or let them continue. Burton wasted no time in recommending Plato for the role, and she was brought in to audition for Diff'rent Strokes instead of continuing with the cheerleading competition. The producers were impressed enough to cast her as Kimberly, and just like that, a random cheerleading audition on a game show known for its bizarre acts and cruel gonging transformed into the launching pad for one of the main roles on what would become a hit sitcom. At the time, Plato was also training as a figure skater and had been considering trying out for the United States Olympic figure skating team, but after landing the Diff'rent Strokes role, she chose acting over skating, a decision that would define the rest of her life. Fact 4. The iconic catchphrase was an ad-lib.
You know something? It really doesn't matter to me whether you go there or not.
Who'd you talking about?
One of the most recognizable catchphrases in television history was never actually supposed to exist in the form that made it famous. When Gary Coleman first received the script for Diff'rent Strokes, the line that would become his signature moment was written out in proper formal English as, "What are you talking about, Willis?" The writers had no idea that the 10-year-old actor was about to transform their carefully crafted dialogue into something far more memorable. According to series writer Ben Starr, who shared the story with the Television Academy Foundation, Coleman read the line exactly as it appeared on the page during the first table read, but something about it didn't feel natural to him. Instead of sticking with the formal phrasing, Coleman compressed the words together in his own unique way, creating the now legendary, "What you talking about, Willis?" The delivery was punchy, skeptical, and perfectly captured Arnold Jackson's sassy personality in a way that the original scripted version never could have achieved. The audience response was immediate and overwhelming. Every time Coleman delivered the line during tapings, the studio audience would erupt with delight and applause, recognizing they were witnessing something special. The writers quickly realized they had struck gold with Coleman's improvised version and made the conscious decision to include it in future episodes, though they were careful about how often they used it. They wanted to parcel it out strategically across seasons so the catchphrase wouldn't wear out its welcome or lose its impact with viewers. The phrase became so deeply embedded in popular culture that it followed Coleman for the rest of his life. By the late 1990s, Coleman had grown so tired of being asked to repeat the line that he flatly refused to say it anymore, no matter who asked or what the circumstances were. What started as a young actor's instinctive feel for natural dialogue had become both his greatest triumph and an inescapable reminder of a childhood spent in the spotlight, proving that sometimes the most iconic moments in television happen completely by accident. Fact 5. Conrad Bain received KKK hate mail.
Just point it and you can't miss what you're looking at.
I'm sure glad you're making good use of it.
Nah, it sure improved my aim in life.
When Diff'rent Strokes premiered in November of 1978, it broke new ground by depicting a wealthy white businessman adopting 2 African-American children, but not everyone was happy about this progressive storyline. Conrad Bain, who played the kind-hearted millionaire Philip Drummond, soon found himself on the receiving end of some deeply disturbing correspondence that revealed just how controversial the show's premise was to certain viewers. After the series debuted, Bain began receiving threatening letters from members of the Ku Klux Klan, and these weren't just angry fan mail scrawled on notebook paper. The letters were sealed in wax by a Grand Dragon, one of the highest-ranking officials in the Klan hierarchy, making them feel all the more menacing and official. The fact that these hate groups took the time to send such formal, sealed correspondence to an actor simply for playing a fictional character who adopted black children shows just how much the show's interracial family dynamic upsets certain segments of the population. But Conrad Bain wasn't the only member of the cast to face harassment from white supremacists. Todd Bridges, who played the older brother Willis Jackson, later revealed that he too was targeted by self-identified Klan members during the show's run. For a young teenager trying to navigate the pressures of being a child star, dealing with racist threats added an extra layer of fear and stress that most people watching at home never would have imagined. The show itself was never heavily political and rarely addressed race relations in a confrontational way, instead focusing on family dynamics and typical sitcom storylines. Yet even this relatively gentle depiction of a mixed-race family living together in harmony was enough to provoke violent threats from hate groups. The harassment that Bain and Bridges endured behind the scenes stood in stark contrast to the warm, loving family portrayed on screen each week, revealing the ugly reality that existed in parts of America, even as the show tried to present a more hopeful vision of what families could look like. Fact 6. Gary Coleman became NBC's highest-paid comic actor.
Could run like a rabbit.
Oh, I'm not exactly a rabbit, but I can outrun a chicken.
When Diff'rent Strokes first premiered in 1978, 10-year-old Gary Coleman was paid $1,800 per episode, which was considered a modest salary even for a child actor at the time. But as the show quickly became a ratings phenomenon and Coleman emerged as its breakout star, his parents, who also served as his managers, recognized they had serious leverage in contract negotiations. Within just a few months of the show's debut, they successfully argued for a substantial raise that boosted Coleman's salary to $30,000 per episode, representing an almost 1,700% increase from his original pay. However, the salary battles didn't stop there. By 1981, with the show consistently ranking in the top 20 and syndication deals promising to generate millions in revenue, Coleman's representatives went back to the negotiating table once again. This time, the contract dispute became so contentious that Coleman actually sat out the first several episodes of the 4th season while his parents held out for an even higher salary. The standoff eventually ended with Coleman receiving $70,000 per episode, and at the peak of the show's success, his per-episode fee climbed as high as $100,000. To put this in perspective, Coleman was earning more money per episode than many adult actors on primetime television, and for a period of time, he held the distinction of being NBC's highest-paid comedic actor, a remarkable achievement for someone who hadn't even graduated from high school yet. According to show writer Ben Starr, the production team understood what they had in Coleman and knew the show's success rested largely on his tiny shoulders, so the network ultimately had no choice but to meet his salary demands. By the time Diff'rent Strokes ended its run in 1986, Coleman had earned an estimated $18 million from the series alone, all before celebrating his 18th birthday. Unfortunately, as would later be revealed in court, much of that fortune would be mismanaged by the very people who had fought so hard to secure it. Fact 7. The show was a detective series.
It didn't take you long to wash your hands, Arnold.
Well, when you wash your hands as many times as I have, it's a snap.
First, before Diff'rent Strokes became the heartwarming family sitcom that millions of viewers came to love. The show nearly took a completely different direction that would have been unrecognizable to fans today. When producers were first developing the series in 1978, they explored several wildly different concepts for pairing Conrad Bain and Gary Coleman together. And one of the strangest ideas involved turning the show into a crime-solving adventure rather than a family comedy. In this early version of the show, Conrad Bain would have played a hard-nosed private detective who worked the streets solving cases, and 10-year-old Gary Coleman would have been cast as his young street-smart informant who helped him crack the tough cases. The producers were drawing inspiration from Bulldog Drummond, a fictional detective character who had appeared in novels, films, and radio shows since the 1920s. And they felt this detective concept could provide the foundation for an entertaining series that showcased both actors' talents in a unique way. Conrad Bain himself was heavily involved in the development process and had considerable input into the various formats and directions that producers considered for the show. He sat in on meetings where writers pitched different scenarios, evaluated which concepts seemed workable, and shared his thoughts on how the characters could evolve over time. The detective idea was just one of several formats that made it far enough into development to be seriously discussed. But ultimately, the producers decided it wasn't the right fit for what they wanted to achieve. Even though the detective concept was eventually scrapped in favor of the adoption storyline that became the show's premise, one crucial element survived from those early brainstorming sessions. The surname Drummond had been chosen as a direct nod to Bulldog Drummond, the detective character who inspired the original pitch. And producers liked the name so much that they kept it for Conrad Bain's character even after the show became a family sitcom. So every time viewers heard someone call out Mr. Drummond during the show's 8-season run, they were unknowingly hearing an echo of the crime-solving series that almost was. Fact 8. Nancy Reagan's appearance was only the second by a sitting First Lady.
I'm so proud of all of you, and I know you won't forget any of the things that we said here today.
When Nancy Reagan stepped onto the set of Diff'rent Strokes in 1983 to film an episode about drug abuse, she wasn't just making a cameo appearance. She was making television history as only the second sitting First Lady to ever appear on a scripted TV series. The first had been Betty Ford, who made a brief phone call appearance on the Mary Tyler Moore Show back in 1975, which meant Nancy Reagan's decision to appear on Diff'rent Strokes was an extraordinarily rare occurrence that showed just how seriously the Reagan administration took the anti-drug message they were trying to spread to young people across America. The producers of Diff'rent Strokes had initially planned something much simpler and less ambitious for their drug abuse episode. They were working on a storyline about juvenile drug use and thought it would be helpful to have the First Lady record a short public service announcement that could be tagged onto the end of the episode, giving kids a direct message about staying away from drugs. The show's creators sent a letter to the White House asking if Mrs. Reagan would be willing to tape this brief PSA. But her staff had a completely different and much bolder idea in mind. Nancy Reagan's press secretary, Sheila Tate, explained that they believed having the First Lady present at the studio all day long would make her role feel more meaningful and give the anti-drug message greater impact than just a simple voiceover at the end. Before accepting the role, the White House needed to make absolutely certain that Diff'rent Strokes was making a genuine and serious effort to educate children about the dangers of drugs rather than just exploiting a serious issue for ratings. Another major factor in Nancy Reagan's decision was the show's incredible popularity with exactly the audience she most wanted to reach. At that time, Diff'rent Strokes was the #1 most watched program among kids aged 6 to 11. In the episode titled The Reporter, which aired in March of 1983, Arnold publishes a shocking investigative story about widespread drug use among his elementary school classmates. And Nancy Reagan reads his article and personally visits the Drummond household to congratulate him on his brave journalism and reinforce her "just say no" message. Fact 9. Conrad Bain's twin brother appeared in drag.
Well, it's going to ruin the surprise that Kimberly and Willis have for you. See, they took Abraham to the pet store to get him a new fishbowl for his birthday.
Conrad Bain, who played the beloved Mr. Drummond on Diff'rent Strokes, had an identical twin brother named Boner Bain, who was also an actor, and in 1983, the producers decided to bring Boner onto the show in one of the strangest casting choices in sitcom history. In the episode titled The Van Drummonds, Mr. Drummond's relatives from the Netherlands come to visit the penthouse, and one of these Dutch visitors was a woman named Anna Van Drummond, who was played by Boner Bain, dressed in full drag, complete with women's clothing and makeup. The episode itself featured Arnold and Willis getting into trouble when they're blamed for the mischievous behavior of their Dutch cousin Hans. But what made the episode truly memorable behind the scenes was the casting of Conrad's real-life twin brother in the role of a female relative. Interestingly, there's been some confusion over the years about exactly how much Bonar actually appeared on screen in the episode, with some sources suggesting that Conrad Bain actually played both parts himself using camera tricks, and that Bonar was only present on set as a body double for shots filmed from behind. According to newspaper reports from the time, Bonar was indeed there during filming and worked on the episode, but he didn't appear on camera from the front except as Anna from behind, while Conrad handled the actual face-to-face scenes through the magic of television production. This wasn't the first time the Bain twins had worked together on screen, as Bonar had previously appeared on Conrad's earlier sitcom Maude, where he played Conrad's character's twin brother Arnold, and he also played a fictional evil twin named Hank Bain in an episode of the comedy sketch show SCTV. The Van Drummonds episode became a curious footnote in Diff'rent Strokes history, showcasing the producer's willingness to incorporate the real-life twin connection into the show's storylines, even if it meant putting one of the brothers in drag to pull off the joke. Fact 10. The show replaced Joe Namath's failed series.
Next time Arnold is on the phone talking to some cute mama, don't do this.
When Diff'rent Strokes premiered on November 3, 1978, it wasn't part of NBC's original fall lineup, but rather arrived as a mid-season replacement for a show that had crashed and burned spectacularly just weeks earlier. The doomed series it replaced was called The Waverly Wonders, a sitcom starring NFL legend Joe Namath as a pro basketball player who becomes a high school history teacher and basketball coach in a small Nebraska town. The show debuted in September 1978 with high expectations, riding on Namath's celebrity status as one of football's most famous quarterbacks, and his guarantee that the New York Jets would win Super Bowl III back in 1969. However, Namath's charisma on the football field didn't translate to comedy, and The Waverly Wonders was panned by critics and ignored by viewers almost immediately. The series lasted only 10 episodes before NBC pulled the plug, making it one of the quickest cancellations of that television season. Network executives were left scrambling to fill the empty time slot on Friday nights at 8 o'clock, a prime position that they desperately needed to turn around. Enter Diff'rent Strokes, which had been in development as a vehicle for both Conrad Bain and Gary Coleman, but hadn't been slotted into the fall schedule. NBC President Fred Silverman saw an opportunity and rushed the show into production, skipping the traditional pilot process entirely because he was so confident in the chemistry between the cast members during their initial script readings. The gamble paid off beyond anyone's expectations. Diff'rent Strokes debuted to solid ratings and quickly climbed to number 27 in the Nielsen rankings by the end of its first season, attracting over 41 million viewers. The stark contrast between the Waverly Wonders' failure and Diff'rent Strokes' instant success became one of the television industry's most dramatic turnarounds of the late 1970s, proving that sometimes the best shows are the ones that get a second chance at someone else's expense. Fact 11. Failed crossovers with Hello, Larry were desperate ratings grabs.
You look just great.
Mr. Drummond, I hope your company keeps having these broadcast conferences so we can keep getting these trips to New York.
I want to work on that.
In one of the most transparent attempts to save a failing sitcom in television history, NBC forced Diff'rent Strokes to participate in multiple crossover episodes with Hello, Larry, a struggling show starring McLean Stevenson that aired right after Diff'rent Strokes in the network's lineup. The network executives hoped that by tying the two shows together, viewers who tuned in for Gary Coleman and the Drummond family would stick around for Stevenson's program about a divorced radio talk show host raising two daughters in Portland, Oregon. What made this situation particularly awkward was that Hello, Larry was already on the air when the crossovers were created, meaning the connection between the two shows had to be awkwardly retconned into both series rather than being planned from the beginning. The crossover episodes established that Philip Drummond and Larry Alder, played by McLean Stevenson, were old Army buddies, and that Drummond's company had conveniently purchased the radio station where Larry worked. This forced connection led to at least 3 hour-long crossover episodes during the first and second seasons, including a Thanksgiving special where the families gathered together and a trip to Disneyland. The problem was that these episodes felt like obvious attempts to prop up a show that simply wasn't working, and audiences could tell. While Diff'rent Strokes was a genuine hit that ranked number 27 in the Nielsen ratings during its first season, Hello, Larry struggled from the very beginning and never found an audience despite NBC's best efforts to use its successful neighbor as a lifeline. The desperate strategy ultimately failed completely. Hello, Larry was canceled in 1980 after just 2 seasons and 38 episodes, and it went down in television history as one of the worst sitcoms ever made. TV Guide later ranked it number 12 on their infamous list of the 50 worst shows of all time, and the show became shorthand for failure in the entertainment industry. Years later, political commentator Arianna Huffington even used it as a reference point, saying that John McCain's return to the Senate would be the chilliest reception for a war hero since McLean Stevenson tried to talk his way back onto MASH after Hello, Larry tanked. The crossover episodes themselves have largely been forgotten, remembered only as a footnote in Diff'rent Strokes history, and a reminder of how desperate networks can become when trying to save a sinking ship. Fact 12. Alan Thicke wrote and sang the theme song.
What is all that?
I just figured out something great to do for that magazine story. I'm gonna be a one-man band. Watch.
Long before Alan Thicke became famous as the lovable dad on Growing Pains, he was already making his mark on television in a completely different way. In the late 1970s, Thicke had built a successful career as a composer and writer for various TV shows, working on everything from variety programs to game shows. His talents caught the attention of Norman Lear, the legendary producer behind All in the Family, and Maude, who was developing a new sitcom called Diff'rent Strokes. Lear needed a catchy theme song that would capture the show's message about different people coming together, and he turned to Thicke to create it. Working alongside his then-wife Gloria Loring and co-writer Al Burton, Thicke crafted the now iconic Diff'rent Strokes theme song with its memorable opening line, "Now the world don't move to the beat of just one drum." The song perfectly captured the show's premise about how different backgrounds and perspectives could blend into one family. But Thicke didn't just write the music and lyrics. He also performed it himself, lending his smooth voice to the opening credits that millions of viewers heard every week from 1978 through 1986. What makes this even more interesting is that Thicke's connection to Norman Lear's sitcom universe didn't stop there. When The Facts of Life spun off from Diff'rent Strokes in 1979, Thicke was brought back to write that show's theme song as well, further cementing his reputation as a go-to composer for family sitcoms. By the time Diff'rent Strokes premiered, Thicke had already written theme songs for several game shows, including the Joker's Wild and Celebrity Sweepstakes, proving he had a real knack for creating earworm melodies that stuck in people's heads. The Diff'rent Strokes theme became so recognizable that even decades later, people can still sing along to its uplifting message about acceptance and family. It's a strange twist of fate that Thicke would later become best known for acting rather than composing, but his musical legacy lives on in one of the most beloved sitcom themes of the 1980s. Fact 13. Todd Bridges dated Janet Jackson. On set.
Wow, you really look beautiful.
Thank you. I sure was surprised to get your invitation, Willis. Now, how come you invited me?
When Janet Jackson joined the cast of Diff'rent Strokes in 1981, she brought more than just her musical talent to the show. She also brought a real-life romance that blossomed behind the scenes. Todd Bridges, who played Willis Jackson, began dating his on-screen girlfriend Janet Jackson while they were filming together, creating an authentic chemistry that viewers could see on their television screens. Jackson appeared on the show as Charlene Dupre, Willis's love interest, and their relationship extended beyond the studio lot into actual teenage romance. The relationship between Bridges and Jackson was relatively brief but meaningful during their time working together on the series. Bridges later opened up about the romance in interviews, admitting that while he cared about Jackson, he ultimately backed away from the relationship because of his own personal struggles at the time. In a conversation with Oprah Winfrey years later, Bridges explained that he had developed a pattern of using and mistreating the girls he dated, and he didn't want to hurt Jackson in the same way. He recalled that Jackson was such a genuinely kind and good person to him that he made the conscious decision to end things before he could cause her any pain. What makes this behind-the-scenes romance particularly interesting is that it happened during Jackson's early career, before she became the global superstar known for hits like Nasty and Rhythm Nation. At the time, she was still primarily known as a member of the famous Jackson family and was just beginning to establish her own identity in entertainment. Her appearances on Diff'rent Strokes helped showcase her acting abilities alongside her musical performances on the show, with one episode titled The Music Man, specifically featuring her singing talents. The real relationship between Bridges and Jackson added an extra layer of authenticity to their on-screen dynamic, even though viewers at the time had no idea that the teenage romance they were watching was actually playing out in real life behind the cameras. Fact 14. Charlotte Rae was released from a CBS contract.
I guess I was depressed. I was with two of my nearest and dearest friends.
What'd they do, stick you with a check?
When Norman Lear was putting together the cast for Diff'rent Strokes in 1978, he knew exactly who he wanted to play the Drummond family's housekeeper, Mrs. Edna Garrett. That person was Charlotte Rae, a seasoned comedy actress with impeccable timing and a warm, motherly presence that would be perfect for the role. The producers felt that her more traditional sitcom talents would work well alongside the unusual lineup of characters, and that, as an older character, she would have great chemistry with Conrad Bain, who was set to play Mr. Drummond. There was just one problem. Charlotte Rae was already under contract with CBS, meaning she was legally bound to that network and couldn't simply walk away to join a show on NBC. For most producers, this would have been the end of the story. They would have moved on to their second choice and found someone else to fill the role. But Norman Lear wasn't most producers. As one of the most powerful and successful television creators of the 1970s, responsible for groundbreaking shows like All in the Family and The Jeffersons, Lear had built up considerable influence in the industry. He was so determined to have Charlotte Rae as Mrs. Garrett that he decided to use that influence to make it happen. Lear personally contacted executives at CBS and convinced them to release Charlotte Rae from her contract, essentially freeing her up to be available for the role on his new NBC sitcom. The gamble paid off. Charlotte Rae was offered the role without even having to audition, just like Todd Bridges, and she accepted. She appeared in every single episode of the first season and continued into the second season until her character was spun off into The Facts of Life, which became an even bigger hit. Mrs. Garrett became one of the most beloved characters in 1980s television, and it's hard to imagine anyone else in the role. Norman Lear's determination and industry clout made sure that the right actress got the part, even if it meant bending the usual rules to make it happen. Fact 15. The Bicycle Man episode. Traumatized Todd Bridges.
Need is a Tarzan yell from you, Dudley. You know, pounding on the chest.
He sounds like a dying water buffalo.
In 1983, Diff'rent Strokes aired what would become one of the most controversial and talked about episodes in sitcom history, a two-part story called The Bicycle Man that dealt with the serious topic of child molestation. The episode featured Gordon Jump, who would later become famous as the Maytag repairman, playing a seemingly friendly bicycle shop owner named Mr. Horton, who attempts to molest Arnold and his friend Dudley by luring them to his apartment with gifts, treats, and eventually showing them pornographic materials. The episode was groundbreaking for its time and was praised by critics for handling such a difficult subject matter with sensitivity. But for Todd Bridges, who played Arnold's older brother Willis, filming those scenes was an incredibly painful and traumatic experience that went far beyond just acting. Years later, Bridges revealed in interviews and in his autobiography that he had been sexually abused multiple times by his own publicist during the years he worked on Diff'rent Strokes, which meant that watching the storyline unfold and being on set during the filming brought back deeply personal and disturbing memories of his own abuse. Bridges described the week of shooting The Bicycle Man as a very hard week, and the experience was made even more difficult because he had to remain professional and continue working while dealing with the emotional weight of what he had personally endured. The irony was heartbreaking, as the show was trying to educate children and parents about the dangers of predators. Yet one of its own young stars was suffering through similar abuse behind the scenes without anyone knowing or being able to help him at the time. Gordon Jump himself called the role one of his most painful but rewarding parts, and he took a gamble playing such a dark character because he knew actors could easily become typecast, but he felt the message was important enough to take that risk.